Look, it's fine to blame your parents until you're 18 years old. Because they screwed you up. But at 18 years old, you have to say, look, okay, my parents screwed me up. I'm now taking my own life over and continuing to screw it up. So if you're an adult, you have no reason to hold on to the past at all. You're an adult. That's adulthood. Adulthood is taking responsibility, right? And so if you want to hold on to something in the past, it's a choice. So you have to make the decision, because the more you analyze and understand it, the more you stay in the victim role, that's where your brain is going to develop.
The Vidal Speaks podcast.
Episode 120, Dr. David Hanscom, MD, The Effects of Anger and Anxiety. Welcome to Vidal Speaks. My name is Deborah Vidal, former 11-year LPGA golf pro turned classical homeopath, certified plant-based nutritionist, and wellness coach. Each week here on Vidal Speaks, we bring you knowledge, inspiration, or natural remedies to help you take charge of your health and feel your best. I believe health is freedom and knowledge is power, so tuning in each week will give you the power to take steps towards freeing yourself from the chains that hold you back from having the energy to do all you want in life. No matter where you are in your journey of wellness, Vidal Speaks can help. I promise. Hi, my friends. How are you guys doing? I've missed you. But I hope you're also following my work on YouTube, because I'm posting videos there too. Of course, my podcast episodes get posted to my YouTube channel, but I'm using the video work to answer questions and to do more teaching. And yes, even my Vidal rants, where I do go off on all the lies that we're fed. But you guys are used to that already, right? If you're a regular listener, you sure are. I've had a lot of fun doing the videos too, and I'm really grateful that I learned how to do them, because it just opens the door for more ways to help people who need it. And of course, to add another way to get the truth out to the world. I've spent almost my entire life studying and searching how to become healthy via nature's medicine, and 25 years in my practice I've dedicated to helping others heal. I've been on a relentless path of learning, studying, reading, experimenting, especially on myself, and of course discovering, because I'm a very curious person, but mainly because I'm very in tune with my life path, which is to speak the truth about how to heal and to help others via my message or any way I can. It feels good to know that you're doing your life work. It's not easy, but it's so rich and fulfilling. I guess that's why they call it wealth, right? WELLTH. That's the kind of wealth that I know. And all the knowledge that I've acquired has mostly given me this sense of freedom, because I don't feel tied into the medical system anymore, nor do I rely on anyone else to help me with my chronic problems. That's the biggest freedom of all. To know you can help yourself is like super freedom, if you ask me. That's why I want to give you guys the ability to learn the simplicity of real health. Yes, it's simple to understand why we get sick and how to fix it, but it's difficult to do it because eating the way we need to goes against the mainstream. Anyway, speaking of freedom, let's talk about freeing ourselves from pain. How about from anger and anxiety? These are things many of us are trapped in on a regular basis. Who better to talk about this but Dr. David Hanscom? He's my favorite because he himself was in chronic pain, and he learned how to get over it by changing his view on life and by taking specific actions to change his life. And he says in the show today that he did it 1 millimeter at a time, because when you're learning it on your own, it takes so long. But when you arrive and you give all you've learned away for free, now think how lucky we are to get all his information, because it took him 15 years to get all this information and to put it in a nutshell. How cool is that? That's the beauty of experience and a person with a curious mind to keep learning. Today's show is focused a lot on how anger affects us physically and neurologically. I love Dr. Hanscom's spin on anger and anxiety. He really has it down, and he understands the trap and the power of the victim mode. He lays the facts on the table, and he teaches us how to choose the life that we want to live, even if it's going to require a big change or a change in how we view the world. He's got so many tidbits of inspiration, and this really is an episode to listen carefully to, because although many listening don't have a pain syndrome, this work that he teaches us is going to help all of us learn that we choose to feel the way we do. We are not a victim. No one makes us angry, you guys, and no one makes us anxious. And we can always choose to get out of this state. It's really great stuff, so I really want you guys to listen up today. Okay, before we start, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Hanscom. I know I've already introduced him last week and in the prior shows, so I'm just going to do a short bio for him now. Dr. Hanscom is an orthopedic complex spinal deformity surgeon who now understands that most chronic pain from any source is solvable, usually without surgery. He is the creator of the DOC, Direct Your Own Care program, which is the subject of his book, Back in Control, A Surgeon's Roadmap Out of Chronic Pain. Dr. Hanscom believes that each human being has a deep drive to thrive and give back. This force is frequently compromised by chronic pain, which has been documented to have a similar impact on your quality of life as terminal cancer. Life becomes one of survival, and through his own personal ordeal, he discovered that chronic pain is curable by systematically using established medical practices in a self-directed manner. Not only have hundreds of people become pain-free using DOC, many of Dr. Hanscom's surgical patients have opted out of surgery after trying the program for only a few weeks. And the key to alleviating chronic pain, Dr. Hanscom discovered, is the patient's control of his or her own treatment plan. He didn't always believe this way. He spent the first 8 years of his practice willingly performing spinal procedures to cure his patients' discomfort until research data revealed that the overall success rate for surgery performed for low back pain was less than 30%. Today, Dr. Hanscom's mission is to reintroduce true healing into medicine. He feels that doctors should be given the time to understand their patients and the life situations surrounding their medical problems, because currently we are prescribing simplistic solutions for complex problems. Okay, are you guys ready? Let's go meet Dr. David Hanscom. Here we go. Put those listening ears on. Here we go. Hi, Dr. Hanscom. I'm really excited to get into part 2 of your work regarding the family triggers around pain and to learn all the dynamics that happen when you live with a person with chronic pain. So welcome back to my show today.
Well, thanks for having me. I always enjoy our conversations, as you know. It's really productive. I enjoy these a lot.
I know, me too. I always look forward to having you on my show. But last week, we spoke a lot about how so many people are living with chronic pain and the basic triggers that happen when you live with a family member that has chronic pain or anxiety, we have to remember. And I also learned last week that anxiety and anger are kind of really the same thing. So in that regard, we really all need this work, not just people who have chronic pain. So why don't we start today by you reviewing that last step that we talked about, just, how people with chronic pain, how they can't speak about their pain and kind of those rules. And then what this next step is and how we kind of move forward into this next phase.
Right. Well, it's evolved over the last 18 months in my practice is that we've now understood that we can do all sorts of medical interventions, but the family dynamics are the trump card. In other words, social isolation is a huge problem in chronic pain. People become socially isolated. We also know just by becoming socially isolated, while you develop the same symptoms as you do with chronic pain, same physical symptoms, Then I also wrote a couple website posts in that when you're socially isolated, it's horrible. I'm a very social guy. And when I went through my chronic pain process for about 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, I became extraordinarily socially isolated, and the loneliness was horrible. So it turns out that human connection, social interaction, is a basic human need because that's how we developed, that's how our consciousness evolved. And then the tribal part comes into play because the people that could cooperate with each other had a higher chance of surviving. So the need to be in a tribe, the need to be socially connected is a big deal. And the deeper the connection, the better. So the family course is the deepest connection. But it's also a modern day phenomenon that's a little bit of a tricky deal because throughout history, it's been sort of a communal environment that the families lived in. People are raised by somewhat of a village than just one or two parents. So there's lots of things that get magnified in the modern day society in the family situation. So first of all, people in chronic pain become socially isolated. Then the isolation occurs even in the presence of other people. When I was going through my own chronic pain episode, I didn't feel very social. I withdrew. Conversations weren't good. My brain was hooked on these obsessive thought patterns about the pain all the time. I would discuss it with lots of different people. People would ask how I was doing. So my life really just closed in on me. What I did realize, and this flat out cost me a marriage, is the impact that my pain had on my family. So I'd like to discuss today, today's probably going to sound a little bit negative because I'm really talking about the problem in detail, and the solutions will be on our next visit. So let me just talk about the solution concept briefly before we jump into the problem, is that anxiety is a necessary survival emotion. It's 1,000,000 times stronger than the conscious brain, so you can't control it. It turns out anxiety is a result of sensory input. It's not the cause. In other words, any threat, whether it's a physical threat or a mental threat, gets met with a chemical response of stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, histamines, those types of hormones. And when you feel that chemical surge, it's very unpleasant, and we'll do anything to avoid that sensation. So basically, the antidote to anxiety is control. And when you control a situation, anxiety drops down and you move on with your life. The problem is when you're trapped by a situation, whether it's money, finances, relationships, pain, why your body secretes more adrenaline and cortisol and stress chemicals to solve the problem. And then you get these massive number of physical symptoms based on your whole body being bathed in this unpleasant chemical environment. What happens is that anger is actually anxiety with a chemical kick. So you have anxiety, you lose control, your body kicks in more stress chemicals to solve the problem, and then you become angry. The problem with anger is destructive because anger is a survival emotion or survival reaction. I'm not even sure it's an emotion, it's just a survival response. And so what it does, it increases the blood supply to your muscles, causes sweating, increases your heart rate, causes your lungs to dilate, but also shuts down the blood supply to the frontal lobe of your brain because you're not thinking, you're just trying to escape and survive. When you're angry, it's just flat out destructive because it's about your survival and only your survival. So it turns out anger is very, very destructive. But going back to the original part of the problem, a physical threat and mental threat are met the same way chemically in the body, same reaction, same emotion, and people in chronic pain are legitimately trapped. And their body's full of these chemicals, and they have all these physical symptoms, and their anxiety is through the ceiling. And the problem is they lose awareness of the surroundings because it's just about them. In a family situation, it's deadly for a bunch of different reasons. First of all, there's a process, anger is just abusive. In other words, you're going to get your need met. And I would say an extreme example of that is people on drugs. A high percent of my practice is with people who are addicted to different substances, including alcohol, etc., but also a lot of IV drugs, even prescription drugs. And what happens, that need overrides everything, just controls your entire life. And I'll just be really clear that everybody that's a drug addict, and I will say this categorically, nobody wants to be a drug addict. Nobody wants to be dependent on pills.
Right.
They just don't. And okay, it's alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, IV, opioids, doesn't matter. Nobody really wants to be dependent on drugs, even really simple, not very toxic drugs. But it's the mental pain that really is the problem more than the physical pain. And that's become very clear in the last 5 years of my practice. We ask people actually carefully, do you want to get rid of your physical pain or your mental pain? What they want to get rid of is the anxiety. The anxiety is just crippling. So then you're trapped by pain, but also circumstances, family, relationship, finances. Your body has a sustained chemical assault, and people get physically sick. So we know that the mortality rate for cancer and heart disease is 50% higher in people that are chronically stressed. It's estimated that the impact of chronic pain is equivalent to having terminal cancer.
Gosh.
That's been documented in a couple of papers. And then nobody believes them, including their family. So what happens, you're in this angry, reactive state, and you walk in the front door of your house, and you've had a bad day at work, or your pain's been really bad, or your doctor gave you bad news, or maybe you're on workers' comp and the claims examiner has been difficult, as usual, by the way. And so there's lots of legitimate reasons to be angry in chronic pain. The problem is when you're angry, it has a horrible, horrible impact on your family. And maybe the main driving force is why there's so much abuse in our country right now. Mm-hmm. So what happens when you're angry, you first of all can't listen. And the essence of relationships is listening. And when somebody's angry and upset, you really can't really meet their needs. As I was starting to mention earlier, an extreme example of getting needs met is of people that are addicted to drugs, and they'll do anything to get those drugs, including verbally abusing their doctors. And I get it, and I understand it, but it doesn't make for a great relationship.
Right.
But also with their families, they come home and they're complaining about their situation, and again, legitimate complaints. But how do you think your family feels? So then you're in a bad mood, you get snappy, and your kid does something that irritates you. And so instead of, just sort of letting it fly by, you might get snappy at them or actually physically yell at them, or sometimes physically hit them. But when you're angry, you honestly aren't in complete control of your senses.
Yeah.
So
I love this idea, though, that you said, when people are angry, they don't listen. That's such a key point, because I think listening in general is such an art to kind of really, perfect in our life, because really there's something about when you're a good listener that can really help your relationships in general. And I can imagine when you're angry, yes, it's really hard to listen because your mind is just so focused and your body's so shooting adrenaline up that you can't go anywhere else. So of course you can't listen, but what a damaging thing to not be able to listen. And I think that's something we all can work on being better on, whether we're in pain or not. It's so true.
Well, it's also very paradoxical and very frustrating, because when you're angry, your body's loaded with stress chemicals, you don't feel good, you're having multiple physical symptoms. But I'm going to jump to the end of the story, which we'll talk about next session a bit, is that the antidote to this whole process is play and laughter.
Mm-hmm.
Because then your body is full of oxytocin, the love drug, dopamine, which is the pleasure drug, serotonin, which is an antidepressant, and what's called the GABA drugs, which are very similar to Valium and Xanax, which help you relax. Mm-hmm. So when you're at play, it's a wonderful chemical cocktail in your bloodstream. And what happens when you're in that mode, while your body chemistry changes dramatically, the speed, your nervous system ceases to become sensitized. In other words, when you're angry and frustrated, the adrenaline and cortisol sensitize the nervous system, which from an evolutionary standpoint makes sense, because if you're trying to survive, you want to be on hyper alert, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, of course.
So then what happens when you go into the play mode, which is a learned skill, by the way, it's not just positive thinking and obsessive play, but as you calm down the nervous system, the nerve conduction doubles under stress, so you feel the pain more. As you go to this chemical cocktail of great drugs internally produced, why the nerve conduction improves dramatically, the pain really does go away.
Mm-hmm.
We do a workshop every year back east at Omega, and within probably 12 to 24 hours after people start literally laughing, being with each other, sharing, talking, pain goes away.
So why do you say that that's a learned skill to play?
Because what happens is as Fred Luskin, who wrote the book Forgive for Good, pointed out, that the human body is designed for one function, and that's to survive. right? I mean, the human body, the organism is not designed to have a good time. So everything's on hyper alert. So again, the species of creatures who could get along with each other had a higher chance of surviving. So there's part of that brain that does exist, but the basic function on a day-to-day basis is air, food, and water, then shelter, then social connection. So you're on the hyper alert all the time. So we do know how to play. That's how also there's a book written by Stuart Brown called Play. Every mammal, I'm not sure about other creatures, but every mammal, the cubs and kittens, play. They're interacting, they're rough and tumble, and it's how you figure out your limits, boundaries, how to negotiate with other people of your species. So play is actually a developmental process that's there. But when I say it's a learned skill, is that our first goal is to survive, and we're always on the alert for danger, which is a huge need compared to play. I mean, play is obviously a developmental issue. But as you get older, that survival thing becomes stronger and stronger. But these survival needs overwhelm everything. We just forget how to do that. We just get crushed. And so when I say it's a learned skill to understand that you can't control the anxiety and frustration. You have to understand its impact it has on people around you. And then you start literally making a decision to learn how to play every day as much as you can. So for instance, I decided about 6 years ago that I'm at work, and I've always enjoyed work, but I made a decision to really enjoy work, enjoy my patients, enjoy my staff, even the adversities of the politics of medicine right now. I decided, I would say decided to enjoy those, but I also realized those are part of the game. And why not take a playful attitude? It's not, again, just play. It's really just a playful attitude of, oh, this is interesting, and curiosity. And when you get triggered, see, the key issue is about being triggered. So go back to the family dynamics. Families trigger each other. And what I say by triggered is that somebody says something that resembles something out of your past, and your body secretes a chemical reaction based on the past experience. So anytime you're anxious or angry, you're actually living in the past. You've lost complete awareness of the present moment.
That makes sense. And so you're coming from that place of being kind of angry and isolated and anxious and hopeless. And then you, in this step that we're talking about moving forward, it's coming after like many years or for sure months where people have felt this certain way, angry, isolated, anxious, hopeless. And so now they have to learn to move forward past that. And part of that is like, you know, as you say, learning the skill of bringing play back into your life. That's one of the steps to move forward.
Right.
And I love Dr. Hanscom, by the way, your website. It's cool you call it a roadmap because it really makes it easy for people to follow through your program in a real step-by-step way. It's so helpful that you've made it that easy for people to take back their, you know, control of their own health, because it's really a step-by-step process. And you even always say, okay, it's step 3.2, or you go, and it's so organized. And this is part of moving forward, is getting organized too.
Right. Well, thank you. The reason why the book has been effective, because literally I spent 15 years in the hole. I mean, I was in extreme chronic pain the last 7 years. I had extreme anxiety. I had 16 physical symptoms. I had no hope. I was completely isolated. You start getting some really unusual thought patterns. We're in this hole. And of course, I thought about quitting medicine for a long time, but for some reason, I'm an excellent surgeon. I was able to do that. I like seeing patients. And I sensed that was still my foothold of just keep getting my sanity back, literally. So I just really, so the process evolved literally a millimeter at a time. And I've been pain-free for about 15 years. And people look at me talking about chronic pain and how severe it was. And they look at me and go, well, how can that be? You're fine. And the answer is, not only am I fine, I'm thriving. And that's been the fun part about this whole process, is that not only do people come out of chronic pain, they do go to pain-free, but they thrive.
Yeah.
In other words, you get tools that allow you to expand your consciousness. You can't solve chronic pain. These are permanently embedded survival circuits. But as you separate and develop a new part of your brain, things change dramatically. The metaphor I'm using is like learning a new language. If you're going to learn Italian, for instance, you're going to buy the books, listen to tapes, maybe take a class or two, and a part of your brain is going to develop that knows Italian, right?
All right.
So same thing with the chronic pain process. You can't solve the chronic pain. Again, these are permanently embedded pathways. As you learn a new language of a nice home, nice life, good friends, spiritual journey, getting your perspective back, it's literally a new language. And as you do the repetitions, that part of your brain develops in a very powerful way. And that's why people thrive. Because honestly, I didn't know that skill. I knew how to survive, and I knew how to have fun, but I didn't know how to thrive.
Right. That's so really well put. And I see how really important this stage is, because you list some steps here, and the first step is, just committing. And it's like anything. Look, I'm a golf pro, and I know what it takes to commit to give it a try. Doesn't mean that you're going to commit to make it so that you become a professional golfer on the tour. But if you don't commit to a daily practice, you certainly aren't going to get there. And it's like anything in life. And sometimes it's these things that you're talking about that aren't so physical, that are kind of commitments to a mental practice or an emotional practice, that are even harder. I think it's always the little things that are harder. I used to tell my sports psychologist that I work with, if you tell me to hit 300,000 balls, no problem, I do it. But when you tell me, to think a certain way or to let something go, it's so more feeling intangible. It's so much harder. So this is what your moving forward steps are kind of, I don't know, in a way you say it's kind of like reassessing their life and reorganizing their life, and it's really like you're rebuilding your life. And if you don't commit to a daily practice, you can't get there. So I understand that's why the first step, and I just want to hear why you think this is an important one.
Well, it turns out that your brain's going to develop wherever you place its attention, correct? Mm-hmm. If you're going to become a golf pro, you're going to spend the time to put the repetitions in, and that becomes permanently embedded in your brain. And you may lose the skill as you use it less, and that's the essence of solving chronic pain. As you use the pain pathways less, they start to atrophy. Just like if you quit playing golf for 2 years, you take a lot of practice to get those circuits fired up, but you could do it. So you could fire up your golf circuits like I couldn't. I'm a golfer, but I'm a really bad golfer, like most golfers. But I couldn't fire up the circuits the same way you do, right? So those circuits are in your brain. They're permanent, the golf circuits. And all of us have anxiety, anger circuits. And you have to decide where you want to place your attention, because your brain's going to think in terms of neuroplasticity, not psychology. Neuroplasticity meaning that your brain changes every second. You have new nerve cells growing, new connections, new myelin, all sorts of things happen in the brain by the millisecond. So it's a very dynamic structure. So you think in terms of brain development, not psychology. Psychology is incredibly helpful as awareness. If you have a psychologist called somatic psychology, which helps you move forward, that's one thing. But a lot of psychology historically has been, if I just really understand the problem in detail, somehow it's going to solve it.
Right. That's so true.
Right. Where's your attention?
Right. Exactly. This is why in my homeopathic practice, I can have patients who've done therapy for 25 years, and they're still talking to me and crying to me about what their mother did to them.
Right. And that brings up a little bit of a segue here. And I think Fred Luskin, again, the author of Forgive for Good, he and I do workshops together, and he was pointing out on one of the workshops, which I thought was brilliant. He says, look, it's fine to blame your parents until you're 18 years old, because they screwed you up. But at 18 years old, you have to say, look, okay, my parents screwed me up. I'm now taking my own life over and continuing to screw it up. So if you're an adult, you have no reason to hold on to the past at all.
Right. So true.
That's adulthood. Adulthood is taking responsibility, right?
Right.
And so if you want to hold on to something in the past, it's a choice. So you have to make the decision, because the more you analyze and understand it, the more you stay in the victim role, that's where your brain is going to develop, right? So going back to the family situation, it's just deadly on your family. So it goes two ways. There's your impact of chronic pain on the family, but there's also their impact on you. So you walk through the door and you're angry and upset. What's that like? And I'm just guessing that when you were a kid yourself, that your parents may have had the same issue. In other words, a lot of people that are in chronic pain have had difficult childhoods. So think of it's like when your parent walks through the door, or your spouse or partner walks through the door, and they're angry. It's not great, right? So there's a direct, what's called mirror neurons effect, where when you're in a bad mood, you're stimulating that part of the brain in your partner or your kids. So
is it true then that people who have had a bad childhood would develop more chronic pain syndromes? That's really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. There's a I think we've talked about this before, called the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it was done in the 1990s on 17,000 patients in the Kaiser system. They simply kept a score of what's called Adverse Childhood Experiences. And I think the original score was 8 variables. I think the more recent one is 10. But the variables include emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, parent in prison, parent on drugs, a divorce, etc. So it's just a list. It's just a number. And if your score is 3 or more, there's something like a double the chance of diabetes, heart disease, suicide, depression, anxiety. It's huge.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen that study, and I have heard you talk about that now that you mentioned it. And it makes sense, really, because when you're the child living in the horrible childhood, then I can imagine your adrenals are pumping cortisol and your adrenaline's pumping because you're always angry, and then you don't have the skills to get out of the anger, and so it makes sense that it will lead you in that direction. But on the opposite side, this is something that I'm curious about your opinion. And I know spirituality can be a funny word, but in my own life and people around me or my practice where people come and they have a chronic situation, even if it's not exactly chronic pain, but kind of some chronic issue like the health issue. And what I found is when it lasts over a long period of time, and yes, I see all the patterns you're talking about, how they feel trapped and angry and hopeless. I saw that. But on the other side, the people that were successful at overcoming it and always seemed in the end that they became a more spiritually aware person. Would you say that that's true? And that the people that, remain in this either looking for a physical cause always, which means they're still angry and anxious and trapped in at least the terms of your program, that they don't seem to have any success yet at that point. So if that's the case, then just like working on your spiritual development should be an asset.
Absolutely. I mean, you get your perspective back. And when we say spiritual, it just means good food, good wine, good friends, just getting perspective back, enjoying your family. It can be a religious experience if you like. It's just getting that perspective back instead of being stuck in the pain pathways.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's a nurtured skill, and it's a developed skill. That the new language you're going to learn is just enjoying your life.
Yeah.
And again, having that perspective back. And then the final phase that I think is actually giving back, actively giving back to other people. And again, starting with your partner and then your kids first. If you're giving back to the world and not treating your family very well, that's not great, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
But also treating yourself well. I mean, the first person to treat well is yourself. And since most of us are raised in fairly critical environments, I've now, as has been said multiple times, it's finally getting through to my consciousness, is that we're generally raised by our parents in society and teachers. When we do something wrong, we get criticized, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then as we go forward in life, I don't know any human being that doesn't have this voice in their head that I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough, right? Because they're always being hard on yourself. We're also taught that being perfectionistic, high standards is a virtue. It's as deadly as it gets. Because where's the end point?
Exactly.
There's none.
Yeah.
Right.
Believe it or not, I see that in golf students.
Right.
Teaching golf students, the most unsuccessful one is the person who's the perfectionist.
Correct.
They can't make any changes. They're so stuck in their mind. Yeah, it's a horrible thing to be in.
Right. So going back to the family dynamics, there's this thing called mirror neurons. When you walk in the door angry, it actually stimulates that part of your family's brain. So it's not great when you walk through the door angry for you. And then even if you don't have chronic pain and you're angry, you're not enjoying your life. Then if you add chronic pain on top of that, you're really not enjoying your life.
Yeah.
So the bottom line here, the common denominator of not enjoying your life is anger. And then again, anger and anxiety are the same thing. What drives people absolutely crazy is the anxiety. And the anger masks the feeling of anxiety temporarily, but it also drives your nervous system in a really hard way, so you develop more physical symptoms when you're angry.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ways people mask anxiety is becoming angry, because anger is powerful. Anxiety is a feeling of being vulnerable, which everybody avoids. So people with chronic pain tend to be really angry. And one of the blocks of treatment is actually letting go of the anger to actually feel vulnerable to move forward. But again, in relationships in the family, one of the essences of relationships is being vulnerable. So the second thing that happens when you're angry, it's abusive, because you're not vulnerable, you can't listen, you can't see the world through other people's eyes. It's only about survival. So you can't see what you're doing. And it took me a long time to figure this out, and I'm rather humbled by my own track record, which in retrospect wasn't great. But when you give somebody advice that's not asked for, you're really saying you're not good enough. Then you overtly criticize your spouse or your kids or people around you. That's not great. There's a book I mentioned before the show called Verbal Abuse, Survivors Speak Out. And about 80% of it's women, even though my family, my mother was the one who was verbally abusive. But anytime you give unasked for advice, particularly if it's sharp advice and telling people what to do, it's abusive. Mm-hmm. The thing that's become incredibly sobering and disturbing to me is that you have this little baby, 4 or 5 years old, little child, and you love this kid, you'll do anything for him, but by the time they become teenagers, you're yelling and screaming at them. That makes no sense. Mm-hmm. And I see it in the clinic all the time now, where people with chronic pain are teeing off on their kids. And I'm going, wait a second, you're the adult, this is a teenager, you have no right to do that. You just don't. And the thing is that what I finally realized is that we're raising our own triggers. In other words, you have family patterns given to you by your parents that you pass on to your kids. So, and the family patterns play out in your new family, whatever that family looks like.
Right.
So every couple, 100%, I don't care who you are and how you look to the world, my nurse and staff and I get to see everybody. Everybody triggers each other. There are no exceptions to that. And it is so common, people think it's sort of normal. And it sort of is, because the majority of people do it, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Some of our daily habits are the most destructive, and this is what you're talking about, like almost having the courage and just the commitment to completely reassemble your life, because our habits are what are making us sick.
Right. So what happens is that you have a 16-year-old kid, and it's unbelievable. And so you've now embedded patterns into your kids that are your triggers. You're the adult, right?
Yeah.
And so the first step is becoming aware of these family triggers. And again, you're in pain, you're trapped, you're angry. But you also have your family patterns that are now playing out in your new family. And then you've also raised your kids, who you've also embedded behavioral patterns that are now triggering you. But I had this gentleman, a few years ago, who, big guy, employed, chronic pain for 5 years. And if I came on a conversation that he's pretty angry. And I go, well, what happens in your family? Long story short, the target of his anger was his kid, 12-year-old kid. I said, how old's your kid? He goes, 12. And I honestly couldn't resist. I really just get upset. So look, you're the adult here. You have no right to do that. Mm-hmm. Your role as a parent, you can be a drill sergeant, or the metaphor I like to use is of being this huge oak tree where the parents are the trunk of the tree, and you're creating a safe place. People thrive and develop and become creative when they feel safe. Mm-hmm. So the main responsibility as a parent, pain or no pain, is to provide a safe environment for your family, including yourself.
Time to take a break and drink a glass of pure distilled lemon water, either hot or cold, depending on what your weather is at the moment. And if you guys are interested in buying the distiller that I use, check out on my products page on vidalspeaks.com and you'll see my countertop model. I love, love, love my distiller. And to me, drinking distilled water is the only way to be sure that I'm not drinking any water with those nanoplastics in it. Ooh. So if you're worried about the water being void of minerals, then you know what you can do. You can take good state ionic minerals to supplement them. I get most of my minerals from my mostly raw, mostly fruit diet, but if in doubt, I always add some ionic minerals at times. Lastly, I want to take a minute to thank you guys. Those of you that are doing my Patreon contributions, thank you so much. I love you guys. I really want to thank you for supporting my work. And if any of you out there can afford it, please consider to become a patron. You'll find the link in the show notes, okay? And also for those of you that are doing the Amazon banner on the Vidal Speaks page, oh, I so appreciate that because I know you have many people asking you to use their Amazon banner. So I really feel grateful that you guys have chosen to use mine. So thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, you guys, let's get back to the interview with Dr. Hanscom. Don't forget to share this show with anybody that's sick or into health or just wanting to learn the real truth of detoxing your way back to good health. All right, love you guys. Here we go. So that's interesting because earlier you mentioned that even a parent possibly giving advice is a form, maybe you could say that the child would take that as a sense of abuse. Is that, I mean, there's a fine line there, right? Because you want to teach your children, the right things to do in life, but at the same time, I see it especially in teenagers when you give advice that it actually creates a worse relationship than anything loving.
There's a book out called Verbal Abuse, Survivors Speak Out by Patricia Evans on verbal abuse. But anytime you give unwanted advice to your family, you're really saying you're not good enough. Now, I won't call that abusive, but it's the first stage of abuse, is that we can talk about human consciousness, is that it turns out concepts are embedded in your brain the same as a chair or table is. So those concepts, I used to say that thoughts aren't reality, but the reality is that they are your version of reality. In other words, you have a certain opinion and it seems right to you, but the other person may have a completely opposite opinion that seems right to them. And so what happens, thoughts get embedded in a brain the same way a chair or table does. In other words, you're interpreting sensory input, it gets embedded in your brain, creates chemical reactions. So thoughts are real, but they're also your version of reality. And that's why you can't talk this stuff out, right? So one of my homework rules we'll talk about next time is I say, look, when you go home, I want you to give no advice to any member of your family for a month. I want you to just listen. And usually it doesn't work, but it's a start. They usually have some success with it. And it does change the game pretty quickly. Because how can you actually have a relationship with anybody unless you understand who they are and get to know them? And then the parents put themselves in a role of being these sources of wisdom and whatever. Remember, their lives are falling apart. So there's a book out called Parent Effectiveness Training by Dr. Thomas Gordon. It was written in 1970s. It's a classic. It's still in print. And I probably read the book at least 20 times. I read the book when my son was about 2. But he's like a translator. So when your kid says, when you say this is what your child's actually hearing.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
It's a wonderful book, and I would highly recommend it to any parent with kids because it just changes the game completely. So instead of going parent-child, in other words, if you have a parent label on you, there's an implied set of responsibilities that you have to meet out. But the reality is, and he points out in the book, how do you actually know that you're smarter or wiser than your kid? You actually don't know that.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Second of all, you're just imposing your view of reality on your kid, so it's not as much fun. In other words, as you impose your view of the world on everybody else, it actually becomes pretty tedious after a while.
Yeah.
So, and then the bottom line, my parenting advice is and I'm not really trying to be a parenting expert here, but I will say that I think the essence of parenting is just play, just having a real relationship with your kid. They're going to do all sorts of things that aggravate the heck out of you. But guess what? You're doing all sorts of things that aggravate the heck out of your kid, right? It goes both ways. And people forget that.
Yeah. So in your steps, when they start commit to daily practice, and then that when you say, I think it's step 4, where you connect with the life that you want. I mean, part of that is play, because that's going to get you. And your step 5 was create your vision of your life. I mean, part of, if you don't get to the play part, it seems like you can't connect with the life that you want, because then you're never stopping those chemicals from, shooting out your adrenaline and damaging your even your physical nerves. But so the play is a really important part, although it sounds to some people like, oh yeah, right. But I can see how important that is, because you can't go forward with a life that you want unless you can get to that point. Would you agree?
Yeah, and the thing about the victim role, it is so powerful. Again, this is a 1,000,000-to-1 unconscious survivor response compared to the rational brain. It's a 1,000,000-to-1 ratio. You have no chance of controlling this. So this is the one part of the process that being a victim is so powerful, you absolutely will never want to give it up. You just won't. And I've been doing this for a long time. I went through a phase about 3 years ago where I labeled myself as, quote, enlightened. And it turned out to be sort of a bad joke, because what's enlightenment? And I honestly thought, I'm so smart, I know this stuff so well, that I'm above being a victim. I'm not going to be a victim anymore. Well, what had happened, I ended up suppressing the emotion, which isn't great. And literally my wife wanted to kill me. I lost awareness because I had a label. See, when you label anybody, when you put a label on anybody, I don't care, is boss, child, parent, spouse, Republican, Democrat, religious, not religious, whatever label you put on somebody, you've lost awareness because you've just projected your view of the situation onto the person's situation. So what happened to me, I labeled myself as enlightened, which means I lost awareness, really. And I now understand that I go in the victim mode all the time. I mean, somebody cuts me off in traffic, somebody says something unkind to me, I perceive things a certain way that are negative, which may or may not be true. So I just become committed to being aware, okay, I'm in the victim role. And the problem is that being a victim is so powerful, nobody ever wants to give it up. Mm-hmm. This is the one part of the process. There's no magic here. It's simply a decision every time you go in the victim role is, how long do you want to stay this? So like, for instance, 60% of people with Parkinson's disease have chronic pain. And I get it. It's a horrible problem. You're disabled. Your life has been physically taken away from you. But you have a choice. You can be angry about it or thrive. Your brain still works. So if you want to stay angry, it really is a choice. You have a legitimate reason to be angry. As Fred Luskin points out, the more legitimate your anger, the harder it is to let go. And of course, chronic pain is a very legitimate reason to be angry. But then you suffer, but your family really suffers because, again, through the mirror neurons effect, by being verbally abusive, you really wipe out your family. So then they're in a bad mood. And then the mirror neurons come back at you, so they're in a bad mood, and so now your brain's stimulated in a bad mood. So you get this cosmic ping pong game taking place. There's just no end to it.
I was just thinking when you were saying all that in relation to your program, I'm curious, like if someone fails, is it more in the stage of reorganizing their life, or is it more in the last stage where they can't give up the victim role and get out of their anger? Or where do you find people getting stuck?
So this took me a long time to figure this out, but there's no beginning or end point to this process. In other words, everybody gets stuck all the time. And I wrote a website section called Learning to Fail. So these are permanent pathways. You're going to always be triggered. But the key is awareness. Before I went through my process, I wasn't aware I was angry because that was my background, right? That was my core patterns. I wasn't aware of anxiety because I suppressed it so well with anger. And so I had no awareness. So the metaphor I use is that we all want to become better people, so we're always trying to fix ourselves. The problem is your attention's on yourself, so you're actually reinforcing the same patterns you're trying to actually solve. I wrote a website post called Solving the Unsolvable, is that you're actually separating and moving forward. So if you're trying to fix yourself, it's like climbing this huge mountain, and at the top of this mountain, there's a better you, or some version of that. The problem is there's no top to the mountain. The climb's a very hard climb. It takes a lot of work, and you never get to enjoy your life along the way. The better metaphor is that of a bunch of balloons tied to a railing, and what you do is anytime you're anxious or angry, you're in a survival reactive pattern, and as you de-energize these reactions, it's like cutting the strings to a balloon, and you just take off. You just cruise, you float, you get to be. Then you go into the victim mode again, and for me, I'm just guessing 5 to 7 times a day, about once every 4 to 6 weeks. It's extremely bad. When I get triggered, my patterns are bad, and I'm not very happy with them. And I got triggered 2 weeks ago at a level I can't even put into words. I was livid about something that in retrospect was ridiculous. But what I also now recognize is that when I come out of that pattern of anger, the situation seems so real and so intense that it just really consumes your entire body, that once you get through that physical chemical reaction, it's ridiculous. What you get upset about is so out of, the level of frustration is so out of proportion to the situation, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I notice this a lot in people that are angry. Usually you look at it and you say, wow, what an overreaction.
Right. So there's no beginning or end point. So like just for instance, let's take today. So you're going to go throughout the day, and the tools are the expressive writing, which we've talked about, and a really key one is called active meditation, where you just simply put your brain on a different sensation for about 3 to 5 seconds. Like right now, just feel where you're sitting. Try to listen to any sounds that you have. You taste your food, listen to the traffic, whatever you want to do, just you simply calm down your nervous system. So remember, when you're anxious and angry, anxiety is simply that feeling generated by the body's stress chemicals. So as you start using tools to decrease the body's stress chemicals, it improves the blood supply to your brain. You have more oxytocin, dopamine, and the love drugs, and your quality of life goes up. So you quote, fail every day, multiple times per day. Then we all have this goal that somehow we get to this certain level of, I'll use the word enlightenment again, that I'll be a happier person. Well, again, you're keeping score, which is another pattern. You're always comparing yourself to the past. And another topic I'd love to talk about in the future is self-esteem, which is a complete myth. It doesn't work. It's one of the worst things ever propagated out of the human experience. Again, you're using rational means to deal with these unconscious circuits. So you just sort of let yourself be with the pain, with the frustration. You accept your, quote, failure to, now you're angry and frustrated. So the question is, how long do you want to remain angry and frustrated? But going back to the earlier part of our conversation is you just make a choice. Okay, I've been angry now for about 2 hours. How long do I want to stay this way? And you just got to cut it. It's not positive thinking. It's just a decision. I'm not going to stay in the victim role.
It's so interesting because I had this experience when I was golfing, and I was getting paid quite a lot of money for an appearance fee to go to Japan, and it put an extra amount of pressure on me because I was feeling the need to succeed because of that, which is so ridiculous. And so I start out the tournament, and I think I bogeyed the first hole, and it's in the winter time because that's when I would go over there. So I think it was early December. Weather's not good. I'm not a great rain player. It's predicted to rain all day, and it's not raining yet, but it's cold, and I bogey the first hole, then the second hole, and the third hole I double. And of course, my mind goes into this crazy, horrible, angry thing at myself, like now you're going to shoot 1,000,000 and you're going to fail. And then I remember saying to myself, before you get across the road to the next tee, you have the choice to choose to stay in this horrible state that's ridiculous, because I could see how ridiculous it was. And you could choose to be in a completely different state that is in the present and confident and enjoys it. And I did it that time, and that's one of the moments in my career that stands out the most for me, because many times you get in that place and you can't, and you don't. Maybe it's because many people don't realize they're choosing to be in there. But I was aware in that moment that was my choice, and it made it so much easier to come out.
Right. No, absolutely. I wrote a website post called Moving Forward with Your Pain. So if your happiness in life depends on more money, more friends, better relationships, less pain, the pain's probably not going to go away tomorrow. And the paradox is you just move forward regardless of your circumstances. In other words, if your peace of mind becomes independent of your external circumstances, you're free. That includes the pain. And paradoxically, this is a letting go and moving forward process, not fixing. So as you truly move forward, you actually use the pain pathways less, and you develop this whole language of life that we talked about earlier, and your brain develops. Your brain physically changes structure. Pain goes away. If you're trying to fix a pain, and that's where we talked about not discussing your pain again with your family, one of the biggest impacts on the family is that people in pain are, again, understandably talking about their pain all the time, and their families are frustrated because they can't do much about it. Plus, it's not that much fun. Plus, it's the same conversation over and over and over again. So the one rule that's been really clear, is had as much impact as the expressive writing, is I say, look, if you're my patient, when you walk out the door of this office, you're simply never going to discuss your pain ever again, at all, with anybody except your healthcare providers. That's it.
Yeah.
And the looks on people's faces are shocking, but it's been incredibly effective. And the family, they come in with their families the next visit 2 or 3 weeks later, and there's a huge shift, just a massive shift, not bringing pain into the household every day, all the time.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So that's been a huge thing. But again, your brain's going to develop where it places attention, and it's just had a huge impact on our practice as a family dynamics. So it's been a remark. So the family dynamics, in other words, we can do all these medical interventions, the writing, relaxation, medications, physical therapy, etc. But if you go home and get triggered, the research shows that the pain goes up. Mm-hmm. Neurons that fire together wire together. So if you're anxious or frustrated about anything, it changes your body's chemistry. The pain goes up dramatically, and of course, more pain, more frustration, right? So you get that cycle going that's pretty deadly. So the family dynamics are they're the strongest factor keeping people in chronic pain. Conversely, by flipping this around, it's by far and away the most powerful thing I've ever seen, pulling people out of chronic pain.
That's cool. And so are there some people that just don't improve and they don't get it? And if so, why do some people get it? Is it just some people have an easier time, or they're more committed, or they have an easier time to letting go of the victim role? I mean, do you have any opinion on why some people seem to get there and others may not?
If somebody engages in the tools, the writing, relaxation, commitment to improving, etc., it's just a matter of time. Some people weeks, sometimes months, sometimes people a year or two, but it's just a matter of time, because you're physically you're actually stimulating things that physically change your brain. This is not magic. It's not a belief system. You don't have to initially believe anything that I talk about. So it's not like this big belief system and all of a sudden your life changes. This is flat out constructing a nervous system that you enjoy being with.
Right. That's so
cool. The problem is the anger part is just on the blood supply of your brain. You're not thinking clearly, and you develop these obsessive thought patterns that actually blocks the treatment. So the biggest factor by far and away is two things. First of all, being a victim is very powerful. People actually become addicted to their pain. They don't want to give it up. It took me years to figure this out. Same thing with me personally. I like being a victim. I don't want to give it up.
Yeah, and it's really hard to admit that. I mean, that's I would say that every other person that I know that is in that victim role would not even say they're in the victim role, and for sure they would say, of course I would give it up.
The problem is when you're in the victim role is that it does cover up anxiety to a large degree. Again, when you're angry, you feel powerful. When you feel anxious, you feel vulnerable. The way I covered up my anxiety, which was extreme as a child, but I wasn't connected to it, is I was a perfectionist. I was always self-critical. Remember, the genealogy of anger is circumstance, blame, victim, anger. And then if you're a perfectionist, you're always a victim of less than perfect. And then you blame yourself for the situation. Then you're a victim, then you're angry. So that's why I think perfectionism exists, because it's not logical. It shouldn't be part of our experience, but it is. I think it's that need to remain in the victim role, which is powerful, is why perfectionism exists in the first place. So same thing, if somebody upsets you at home, you want to blame them. But guess what? They triggered you. And when you're angry, it's 100% you. It's not the person who triggered you. The problem is it still feels like them.
That's what we have to learn. That when
Right.
you're angry, like the sentence people use a lot is, you made me do this, or you made
Right.
me feel like this. And
Right.
I would always say, no, I don't make you feel any way. You choose to feel that way.
Absolutely.
So this is the really big thing in life, to kind of learn to take responsibility, and no one makes you angry and no one makes you do anything. That it's always, we have a choice. And I think once we learn the freedom that there's actually a choice there, then we can also choose to step out of that earlier than maybe in the past.
The problem with anger, it creates these what I call obsessive thought patterns, where the doctor is missing something, people don't believe me, and these circuits keep racing and racing and racing, but they're unconscious and they're not subject to rational control. So if you start arguing with somebody who's angry about not being angry, they can't even hear
Yeah,
you.
forget it.
And then I call it phantom brain pain, which is similar to phantom limb pain. You have these spinning circuits that don't stop. Same thing with phantom limb pain. Even though you've amputated your arm or leg, you still feel the pain. Well, it's pretty profound. But I call it a selective psychosis. It could be a body image issue where people think I'm ugly and you're not, but your brain gets spinning away. And remember, we try not to think about something, you think about it more. And then when you're upset about it, it makes it even worse. So what happens, the biggest block to this treatment by far is people's willingness to engage. In other words, just be open. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And but again, the other problem is that being a victim is so powerful, people really don't want to give it up. So you have the process of not being able to actually hear the person trying to help you, but also people talk to each other about their pain. It is a somewhat intimate conversation. People bond on pain, so they don't want to give that up either.
Right.
And I understand it. I mean, I get it. And so a social connection through a negative bond is still better than no connection at all.
Yeah, but you're chronically on the subject and reinforcing the pathway, so I get it. So let's end on this question. I want to ask you what you would say. I know it's probably difficult because all of your stages and all of the steps under your stages have such a great part of the process, but what would you say today is the single biggest key, or maybe even the few most important keys to success in this program and getting rid of people's chronic pain?
I think the thing that's helped me the most is awareness. In other words, becoming aware of your impact on people around you is watch people's reactions. Become aware when you're angry and upset. Become aware when your sentences are short. Become aware when you're critical. So become aware of your impact on other people. And as you become aware of what's going on, then you have a choice of making a change. Okay, do you want to be that person who walks through the door and people are terrified of seeing me? So first of all, you may not be aware of what the reaction is in your family. So, or do you want to be that person where you walk through the door, and even if you're in a bad mood 1 out of 9 times, nobody knows when that's going to happen. So there's this anxiety about, well, dad or mom's coming home. What mood are they going to be in?
Yeah.
So you have to, if you're in a bad mood, don't come into the house. So becoming aware of your impact on other people is a big deal.
That's nice.
And then once you become aware of the negative impact, then you can start actually making ways of becoming more positive and make sure that you're meeting your family's needs and other people around you. But it really is around awareness. And the second thing is play. Mm-hmm. Just really develop true relationships with your kids, which involves listening only, no criticism at all, no advice giving at all. But also remember back when you were a kid. Just do a little meditation of remembering when you were a kid and think about your parents in a good mood versus a bad mood and visualize what that was like. And remember, you have your parents' patterns programmed into your brain. So you're doing the same thing. You may not understand or see it. But again, I think the key to this whole thing is just really becoming aware of your impact of your pain on other people.
Wow, that's so good. And it's really a way to get out of your own self because, being in chronic pain and feeling trapped equals not being aware, equals narcissism, basically. And it's
right.
not a nice place to be around anyone that's in that state, not because they're in pain, but because their life's all about them. So I get
right.
it. Fantastic.
But I do want to emphasize one thing. I do want to emphasize that chronic pain is a bad deal. So I do understand the problem. So being self-centered and narcissistic, they sound like bad words, but they're also understandable words. I mean, you're trying to survive. And the medical profession's not helping you out. You're trapped and you're desperate. So the reactions are understandable, and we're not even teaching our patients to become aware. And if I hadn't gone through my whole horrible process, I would have no awareness at all what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So this is all understandable stuff. So I don't want anybody to feel like they're being criticized for being this, and this, because it's not true.
Right, because when you worked with Lloyd, when we spoke, one of his first, understandings of it was, it's not validating that I have real pain. It's all in my head. And I said, that's not it at all. Just keep reading. You'll get it. It's not about not validating that we're not saying that people with chronic pain, it's all in their head. You're saying that it's actually, this is what Dr. Sarno's work did when I worked with his book, and when I had my chronic back pain, it was really about saying, no, it's a physical problem. It's an actual medical diagnosis, and you can call it this or this, whatever they want to call it. It's actually a problem, but it's being created by the chemicals we're putting out from our emotional state.
Yeah, so it's serious suffering. I mean, again, we've talked about this before. I mean, there's no such thing as pain in your head. Because, think about it's just a unit. In other words, think about trying to fly a Boeing 747 without a computer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And your body is infinitely more complicated than a Boeing 747 plane. So, most of the cell bodies of the nervous system reside in your skull, but every square inch of muscle tissue has 1 million pain fibers per square inch, just pain fibers.
Wow.
So it's just a unit response. And so this separation of mind versus body is incredibly flawed and damaging in how we care for people. So there's suffering. It's real. I mean, your body's full of stress chemicals. That's not in your head. That's in your body, right?
Yeah.
And people say, well, you're saying it's in my body, not my head, or vice versa. Well, come on. Who are we? We're human beings that have a mind. We have a nervous system, muscles, tendons, ligaments. We're just a unit that's made to survive this planet. So the suffering is real and intense and prolonged. So the idea that the pain would suggest that the pain is not in your head makes no sense. It's in your body.
Right. It's real. It's there.
Right.
But you just have to understand what's driving it. You have to understand the driving force behind it, which you have total control of, and you can choose, along with what you said, daily practice, getting organized, connecting with the life that you want and creating your vital future life that you want. These are all the steps that people have to take, and it's part of redoing their life in a completely new way. So it's a step by step, and of course, like you said, there's going to be a lot of failure, but you just do it. It's not like getting to the top of the mountain and saying you succeeded. It's about learning the process, so every time you're in a place, you know what to do.
Right.
And that's ultimately everybody's goal. And I think all of this stuff is so helpful because we all can use it. And although I know these shows are from you and you're a spinal surgeon who deals with tons of patients with chronic pain, but the truth is we all have these triggers. We all have this ability to get stuck into ourselves, or to not listen to people, or to be anxious, or to oppose our opinions on others, or to be judgmental by, giving advice. And that's something I work really hard on in my life, because it's so much more pleasant life when you don't do that and you really learn to try to accept a person for who they truly are.
Right.
Well, I love your stuff, Dr. Hanscom. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I always tell people, and I'll say it again, to go to your website, backincontrol.com. It's so well organized, and just check out your roadmap and read your book, because it's really something so necessary in today's world with so many people living in chronic pain and chronic anxiety. So thanks for all you do.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on your show.
Okay, well, it's been nice talking to you. We'll talk again for our last one.
Sounds good.
Okay. That's such great advice. There were so many things he said today that left an impression on me. First of all, I think it's so hard to drop labels, but it's so true. We really need to let those go. They just come to your mind so fast, don't they? It seems like you look at a person and bingo, you've created a label. Or the person is 5 minutes late and you've already created a label about them or their story. Judgment is so ugly because it really closes the door to the now, to the possibility of pure joy. I really try to work on this on a daily basis. It's not easy, especially in today's world that just seems to have so much violence, negative forces, and division. But ultimately, I do believe love heals and joy will keep us healthy in addition to our good lifestyle and detox habits. Joy is so important, which brings me to the other great piece of advice that Dr. Hanscom said. He said, learn to play. Again, in today's world where so many people have 2 jobs, credit card debt, kids with learning disabilities, or whatever else on their plate, it seems like there's no time for play. But without it, I believe we're going to shrivel up and get sick, because without play, there's no laughter, and then there's no joy. And joy is the highest vibration of any emotion. So I totally believe this. We have to schedule time into our lives for play. Got that? Good. Me too, you guys, because I'm going to work on this one. I really want to read that book called Play. I bet it's good. And I put the link in the show notes in case you want to read it too. And another thing I loved is when he says we have to learn that we're choosing to be angry, that no one makes us angry. It's our choice. Once we learn this, we can choose a different reaction. I know this to be true from my own experience. Sometimes we still choose to be angry, but we have to become aware that it's our choice. Then we have a tool to get out of it, and that choice is freedom. And speaking of awareness, this is the biggest key. If we're aware, then we're good listeners. We're making better choices. We have room for gratitude and empathy and sympathy. But without this, we're stuck in a world all about me, me, me. You can see why chronic pain is such a dead-end cycle, right? If you can only think about pain, then you can only think about you. And then there's not one bit of room for much else. No wonder things seem so bad, right? Well, you guys, let's all work on these skills and we'll become all more grateful and more playful and more loving and maybe even better listeners. We've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. On that good note, I'm going to tell you guys that I think it's enough for today. So I hope you enjoyed the show today, my podcast family. You know what time it is, right? Yep, it's time to say goodbye. Till next time, no labels, be filled with gratitude for what you have, and mostly be aware that you're choosing to be in the space that you are. See what happens, okay? All right, Vidal has spoken. Remember, you heal with a plant-powered diet, homeopathy, and detoxing. Of course. Peace, be healthy, be free, live life.